What if I told you that God is speaking to you every day, but you may be too distracted to notice? Have you ever wondered why certain thoughts come to you in silence, or why you sometimes feel peace in the midst of chaos? These could be divine messages. Now think with me. How would you know a divine inspiration from a simple thought? What do you do when you feel that something greater is trying to guide you? And most importantly, how do you open your mind and heart to hear that voice? In this video, I'll show you how to recognize God's signs in your mind and how they can transform your days, your decisions, and even your view of the world. You don't want to miss the answers that can change your life. Stay with me to the end, because what you'll learn today could be just what you've been looking for. When you look up at the starry sky, have you ever felt a peace that you can't explain? Or perhaps, in a moment of doubt, a clear idea came out of nowhere? This is the simplicity with which God communicates. He doesn't shout or demand. His presence is like a gentle breeze. You can't see it, but it changes the environment. Yet many believe that hearing God is something mystical or distant, reserved for the few. Let me tell you, it isn't. The truth is that God's voice is expressed in the most mundane things, in the depths of your mind. When the chaos of life seems deafening, God is whispering in the intervals, waiting for you to be ready to listen. So why is it so difficult for so many people to hear this presence? The answer lies in the inner noise, the incessant worries, fears, and even the certainties we carry. These sounds drown out what should be clear and direct, the divine guidance that is born within you. But how do you separate these sounds from the real message? Think of how a radio works. If you don't tune it properly, the sound will be full of static. The same thing happens with the mind. When it's overloaded, the messages coming from above are obscured. But just like a radio station, you can adjust the frequency to pick up what really matters. This requires no supernatural effort, just a willing heart and a calm mind. But the simplicity of this connection depends on something essential: recognizing that God speaks in the language of love and peace. His communication never brings confusion or guilt, but clarity and hope. And when you learn to recognize this voice, you realize that it has always been there, waiting patiently to be heard. What happens when we encounter barriers that seem insurmountable and block this contact? After all, the mind is not only the place where God speaks, but also where the greatest conflicts can be born. Have you ever noticed how the mind can become a storm? Thoughts that accumulate like heavy clouds, bringing doubts, fears, and feelings that seem to have no end. These are the obstacles we put up without realizing it, blocking the flow of the divine in our lives. But know that no matter how thick these clouds are, the blue sky of inner peace is always there, waiting to be revealed. These blockages often start with fear. The fear that we're not good enough, that we'll fail, or that God is far away, keeps us from feeling His presence. But I want you to know something important. God never distances Himself. It's the human heart that distances itself when it gets lost in negative thoughts or attachment to fleeting things. Another common obstacle is excessive control. How often have you tried to plan every detail of your life, believing that everything is up to you? This constant effort to hold the reins can stifle the serenity needed to listen for divine guidance. Let me remind you, to trust is to free yourself from the burden of having to solve everything on your own. In addition, the search for distractions also becomes a powerful barrier. We live in a world that offers too much entertainment and information. This fills the mind but empties the spirit. It's not that these things are wrong, but when they take the place of silence and introspection, we end up disconnecting from what is essential. There is still the habit of listening to outside voices rather than the one that echoes within. Other people's opinions, criticisms, and social expectations shape our thinking and lead us away from what is true. But the divine voice never competes. It is always there, waiting for you to choose it over the noise. But while these obstacles may seem great, none of them are insurmountable. For the Father, in His infinite goodness, has given us the power to transform the inner storm into calm. To do this, we must learn to quiet our minds and make room for something greater. Have you ever wondered why it's so hard to hear that still voice that brings peace and clarity in the midst of the hustle and bustle of everyday life? Inner silence is not just the absence of sound, but a state in which the mind can rest and the spirit can listen. It is in this space that God reveals himself, not as something distant, but as an intimate and transforming presence. When the mind is still, you perceive what has always been there, the divine presence. You don't need words or extraordinary signs. God speaks through a silence that transcends human understanding, a sense of certainty in the midst of uncertainty. This stillness is more than a pause. It is a portal to a state of consciousness in which the connection with the Father becomes evident. But how do we reach this state in such a noisy world? First, recognize that silence doesn't come from outside, but from within. It begins when you choose to stop for a moment and just be present. It could be observing nature, closing your eyes to listen to the sound of the wind, or even paying attention to your own breathing. These simple practices open up space for the mind to find serenity. It's also important to learn to welcome the thoughts that arise without judging them or trying to push them away. They are like waves that come and go, but if you don't cling to them, you will realize that beyond the waves lies an ocean of deep calm. It is in this depth that God's voice becomes audible, not as words, but as understanding. When you experience this stillness, something begins to change. Doubts dissolve, worries are rearranged, and what once seemed impossible becomes clear. In this space, God not only speaks, but surrounds you, showing you that his presence is not something to seek, but something you already have. For this silence to become a habit, however, you must learn to discern what comes from the divine and what comes from the ego. When the mind is quieter, it's easier to confuse the two voices. One of the biggest doubts that arises when we try to listen to God is, how do I know that the voice I hear is really his? After all, our minds are full of thoughts that arise all the time. But there is a clear difference, and when you learn to perceive it, the divine becomes unmistakable. God's voice doesn't bring confusion, fear, or judgment. It is like a spring of pure water in the middle of a desert, bringing life and renewal. On the other hand, the ego manifests itself through haste, doubt, and the need to control. If a thought brings worry or puts you at odds with yourself, it's probably the ego trying to take over. Think about how God works. He doesn't force, he doesn't demand, he doesn't rush. His words come as a gentle invitation that inspires and guides but never pressures. The ego, on the other hand, is impatient and wants immediate answers. It uses complex justifications and often makes you feel guilty or unworthy. But God never blames you. He welcomes you and guides you with love. Another point is repetition. The voice of the ego insists loudly, creating a cycle of doubt and fear. The divine voice, on the other hand, is firm but calm, bringing a certainty that doesn't need to be said more than once. When you listen to it, there is a peace that takes over, even when the message seems challenging. Finally, there is the effect of the messages. What comes from God always leads you to a higher place, to a more loving attitude, or to a decision that benefits not only you but others. The ego, on the other hand, seeks only its own benefit, often ignoring the consequences for others. Observe the fruit of your actions. If it brings peace and upliftment, it is a sign that the root is divine. As you begin to discern these differences, communication with God becomes clearer. But there's more. God doesn't just speak through the mind. He also uses the signs around him to confirm his words and presence. Has it ever happened that something seemingly ordinary turned into a clear answer to what you were looking for? Or maybe you felt an inexplicable peace in a moment of great doubt. These are examples of how God communicates through signs. He uses everything around us to communicate his presence and guidance. God's signs are not necessarily grand or spectacular. They often come in subtle ways, such as an unexpected conversation, a sentence in a book, or an encounter that seems to have happened at just the right time. These small moments carry a message, and to hear it, one must be attentive and open. God speaks to those who are willing to listen, not only with their ears, but also with their hearts. Another common way to perceive divine signs is through nature. Creation is full of God's signature. The sunrise, the sound of the wind, or the harmony of a garden can bring you the answer you need. The secret is to step out of your restless mind and observe with eyes that seek meaning. Often what appears to be mere beauty contains a message that only you will understand. There are also the signs that come from circumstances. A door that closes or one that opens unexpectedly may be God's way of redirecting your steps. It may be painful at first, but in time you will realize that everything that happens, even the difficulties, have a greater purpose. God never wastes a moment of your life. Every experience has something to teach you. Finally, the most profound signs usually appear within you. A feeling of peace, a clear idea, or an intuition that seems to transcend human logic are all ways in which God speaks directly to your spirit. When you feel this inner movement, trust. It is confirmation that He is present and guiding your every step. However, in order to clearly perceive these signs, it is essential to understand the language that God uses. This language is universal and yet deeply personal. It always reflects love, peace, and truth, never doubt or fear. Have you ever noticed that some words seem to carry more weight, as if they touch the heart in a special way? God's language is just that, full of love, wrapped in peace, and anchored in truth. This communication is not limited by languages or traditions because it goes beyond words. It speaks directly to the soul. Love is the foundation of this language. It is not a conditional love that asks for something in return. It is a pure love that welcomes and comforts even in the most difficult moments. When God speaks, there is always a message of care, like a father who wants the best for his children. That's why any thought that brings guilt or fear does not come from Him, but from the ego or from outside influences. Another unmistakable sign of God's presence is peace. When God communicates, even in the face of challenging situations, there is a sense of calm that transcends the surrounding chaos. This peace doesn't mean the absence of problems, but an inner certainty that everything is under the control of the One who knows best. It's a state of trust that needs no explanation, only surrender. Truth is the third pillar of the language of God. His messages are never confusing or contradictory. They bring clarity and purpose to help you see the path more clearly. God doesn't promise shortcuts or easy solutions, but His words always point to what is just, right, and good. When you follow this truth, even if it seems challenging at first, the fruit is always growth and fulfillment. This divine language is not just something that can be heard or felt, it can also be lived and expressed. Every time you act with love, promote peace, or choose truth, you are speaking the same language as God. And in doing so, you become a channel for others to experience this connection as well. Understanding this language is like tuning into a melody that has been playing forever. The more you listen, the more you realize that it is present in everything around you. And as you open up to this melody, you begin to see how prayer and meditation can amplify this communication. Have you ever felt that when you close your eyes in prayer, something inside you changes? It's as if a silent and profound world opens up, bringing peace, clarity, and a sense of connection that cannot be explained in words. Both prayer and meditation are powerful tools for aligning with divine wisdom because they create a space where heaven and earth meet within you. Prayer is more than asking. It is an intimate conversation, a moment of communion in which you open your heart without reservation. When you pray sincerely, your mind calms down, your worries disappear, and a new horizon opens up. The secret is not only to speak, but also to listen. God often answers in the silence that follows a prayer, in the stillness that enters your mind. Meditation, on the other hand, is like fertile ground where the seed of divine connection can grow. When you meditate, you allow your mind to slow down and your awareness to expand. It is in this state of presence that God's messages become clearer. It's not about emptying your mind, but filling it with the serenity necessary to recognize the divine presence. Both practices have something in common. They invite you to leave the outside noise behind and turn inward, where God dwells. Prayer can be done with words, while meditation invites silence. But both lead to the same destination, an encounter with the divine essence that is always accessible, just waiting for you to seek it out. Moreover, the regularity of these practices is fundamental. Just as a friendship grows over time, your connection with God is strengthened when you devote consistent moments to being in His presence. It doesn't matter if these moments are short or long. What matters is the intention with which you live them. A sincere heart is what pleases the Father most. As you incorporate prayer and meditation into your daily routine, you will notice profound changes. Your thoughts become clearer, your decisions more aligned, and your heart more peaceful. This state of connection not only enriches your spiritual life, but also transforms the way you deal with challenges. And here is where something even greater begins to reveal itself. Challenges are not obstacles, but messages that can bring divine lessons. Have you ever gone through a difficult time and, after overcoming it, realized that it brought essential lessons into your life? God has creative and profound ways of guiding us, and one of them is to use the challenges we face as instruments to teach, redirect, and strengthen our spirit. No matter how painful an obstacle may seem at the time, it may contain a divine message if you are willing to listen. Sometimes challenges come as forced pauses that force us to slow down and look inward. Perhaps it's a door that closes or an opportunity that doesn't materialize, leaving an emptiness that is hard to bear. But what seems like a loss can actually be an opportunity for redirection. God uses these moments to lead us out of situations that are not in harmony with the greater purpose of our lives. Other times, challenges come as trials that test our faith and resolve. These may be complicated relationships, financial problems, or even health issues. In the midst of these storms, the mind can be filled with doubt and fear. But it is in these moments that God whispers to the heart, "Trust me, this too shall pass." The challenge becomes an opportunity to develop resilience, patience, and above all, trust in the divine. Challenges also help us see our priorities more clearly. We often get lost in the superficial and forget what really matters. A difficulty can be the wake-up call we need to reconnect with what is essential: love, gratitude, and faith. God uses circumstances to remind us that we can overcome anything if we put our trust in Him. Challenges also create empathy. When you face a difficult situation, you become more able to understand the pain of others. This connection with others is not only a blessing to those who receive your support, but also a way for God to work through you. He turns your experience into an instrument of healing and compassion. Finally, when you look back, you realize that even the most difficult moments had a purpose. It's like a jigsaw puzzle that, as you complete it, reveals a bigger and more beautiful picture than you could have imagined. It is in this understanding that trust grows, preparing you to listen more clearly and deeply to God's voice in every aspect of life. Have you ever noticed that in moments of doubt, trust seems to be the hardest thing to do? Yet it is this trust that brings us closer to God. Listening to His voice is not just a matter of quieting the mind or recognizing the signs. It is above all an exercise in faith, believing that God is always there, even when we can't see or understand His ways. Trust is like taking a step on unfamiliar ground, knowing that there is something solid under your feet, even if you can't see it. When you trust God, you make room for Him to work in your life in ways you could never imagine. Trust doesn't immediately eliminate fear, but it transforms it. Little by little, what seemed like uncertainty becomes courage because you know you're not alone. It's important to remember that trust doesn't come out of nowhere. It grows as you observe God's faithfulness in the little things. Each time you turn a problem over to Him and see how the solutions reveal themselves at the right time, your faith is strengthened. This trust is like a flame. It starts small, but it can light up a whole darkness if it is fed. As you trust, your spiritual listening deepens. This is because trust dissolves the barriers of fear and doubt, allowing you to hear more clearly. Often God's voice doesn't come as a command or an immediate solution, but as a gentle encouragement that says, "Go ahead, everything is in place." You have to trust that whisper, even when human logic seems to contradict it. Trust also means accepting that the answers won't always come as you expect. God works in ways beyond our understanding. Sometimes God's silence is actually a way of teaching us to wait. And in waiting, we learn to strengthen our spirit and to appreciate every little manifestation of His presence. When you put your trust in God, your life becomes lighter. This doesn't mean that the challenges disappear, but that their weight is shared. The burden is no longer yours alone, and you feel that someone greater is taking care of every detail. This total surrender makes it possible to act with more certainty, even when the vision is not yet complete. And it is precisely this trust that enables us to put into practice everything we hear from God. Because true listening doesn't end in silence, it leads us to action. Hearing God's voice is a transforming experience, but it's only the beginning. The true divine connection is revealed when you put into practice what He inspires in your heart. God doesn't just speak to comfort or soothe. His words are a call to action, a guide to living with purpose and love. God-led action is not grand or theatrical. It often manifests itself in the small choices of everyday life. Forgiving someone who has hurt you, offering help to someone in need, or simply acting with patience and compassion in challenging moments. When you act on His messages, you transform not only your life, but the lives of those around you. But how does one act with confidence? First, recognize that divine guidance always leads to good, even when the path seems uncertain. Doubts may arise, but remember that God doesn't require immediate perfection. He only asks that you take the first step, trusting that He will guide the next. This trust is the foundation of all spiritual action. Also, be alert to the opportunities that arise after listening to God's voice. He often opens doors that seemed invisible, places people in your path, or presents situations that cry out for your response. Recognizing these opportunities is a sign that you are in tune with His will. And as you act, you'll see how each small decision is in line with the greater purpose He has for your life. Remember, too, that the action doesn't have to be perfect. God understands our limitations and celebrates every sincere effort to live according to His word. Don't worry about mistakes, for even they are part of the learning process. The important thing is to move forward, even in small steps, toward what He has placed in your heart. When you act on divine guidance, something wonderful happens. Your life begins to reflect the peace, love, and truth you have received. You become an instrument of God in the world, spreading light where there was darkness. This transformation is not just yours. It reaches everyone around you, inspiring them to listen and act as well. And so, as you live in a way that is led by God, you not only discover how He speaks, but you experience the depth of His presence in all that you do. For true spiritual listening culminates in action, and action transforms listening into living. God's voice is nearer than you think. He speaks in silence, in circumstances, in small gestures, and in the depths of your heart. Hearing Him is not the privilege of a few. It is a promise to all who open themselves to God's presence with faith and trust. Remember, every challenge can become a message. Every step guided by God can transform your life and the lives of others. You are not alone. The Father is at your side, guiding you in love, peace, and truth, even when the path seems dark. Now it's your turn. Listen. Trust. Live according to the divine wisdom that already dwells within you. For in hearing and following the voice of the Creator, you will not only find meaning, you will become a light in a world that so desperately needs hope. May your path be illuminated, and may you discover each day the peace that already lives within you. Go forward with courage, for the kingdom of heaven is within your reach. Stay with God.